Religion taught us to fear hell, but maybe hell was never meant to be feared, only understood. For centuries we've been told that hell is a pit of fire, a punishment waiting for the wicked, a place of eternal agony sealed beneath the earth. Yet what if the story was never about there, but always about here? What if the fire was never meant to consume the body, but to illuminate the soul? Religions have always spoken through symbols, maps of the human spirit disguised as myths. But somewhere along the way, humanity mistook metaphor for reality. We took poetry and turned it into doctrine. We took a mirror meant to reveal ourselves and called it a cage to keep us in fear. Hell was never a place for the dead. It was a state for the living, a fever of the spirit, a flame of consciousness burning in forgetfulness. Look closely. The fire is already here. It burns in our wars and ideologies, in the hatred behind our certainties, in the quiet despair behind every glowing screen. Every time compassion dies, a small corner of the world catches fire. We have been searching for the afterlife while burning through the one we already have. The first flames of hell appeared not in the heavens or the underworld, but in a real valley outside ancient Jerusalem. Gehenna. It was a place where waste was burned, a warning about what happens when the sacred is forgotten, when the earth itself becomes a sacrifice to our blindness. Jesus used that valley as metaphor, not threat, an image of spiritual decay, not divine punishment. But as centuries passed, metaphors were misread, and fear replaced understanding. The language of awakening became the language of control. The story that was meant to free us began to chain us. In Hebrew scriptures, Sheol was never a realm of flames, but a shadowed resting place, a symbol of unawareness, not punishment. In Greek myth, Hades represented the unseen world, a reflection of the psyche. In Buddhist cosmology, Naraka spoke of mental states born from ignorance, not eternal condemnation. Every tradition whispered the same truth. Hell was not a location. It was a condition. Hell is the mind that cannot forgive itself, the heart that has forgotten its own light. It is the soul that keeps searching for God above, while ignoring the silence within. And yet, there is something sacred hidden in that tragedy. Because if hell is symbolic, then the fire that burns also purifies. If descent is metaphorical, then every fall carries the seed of awakening. The ancients knew this. In every mythology, the hero descends before he rises. Orpheus walks through Hades for love. Christ descends into death to bring back life. The Buddha sits beneath the Bodhi tree, confronting the demons of illusion until they vanish into light. Hell was never the end. It was the threshold. Perhaps you have already walked through your own infernos, through heartbreak, through loss, through the nights when faith in anything felt impossible. Maybe those were your flames, and maybe you returned from them not cursed, but cleansed. Because the story of hell was never about punishment. It was about transformation. It was a map of descent into the depths of the human soul, where the ego burns away and something eternal survives the fire. So when religion taught us to fear hell, it wasn't God's voice we were hearing. It was the echo of our own misunderstanding. A divine metaphor misread as threat, a mirror mistaken for judgment. And the moment we finally understand that, the flames begin to fade. The story of hell was never born from divine wrath. It was born from human longing, our desperate need to explain the pain we could not understand. Long before religions built their heavens and hells, people sat beneath the stars and asked the same ancient question: why do we suffer? And because silence offered no answer, we painted the sky with myths. In the deserts of early Judaism, Sheol was a shadowland, not a place of flames, but of stillness. The dead slept there, untouched by reward or punishment. It was humanity's first attempt to name the unknown. Later, as stories evolved, Persian mystics introduced dualism, light and darkness, angels and demons, and the Hebrews, under exile, absorbed those ideas. Slowly, the metaphor began to harden. The unseen world gained shape. Fire became judgment. Darkness became guilt. The symbol began to solidify into fear. When Christianity rose, it inherited this language, but wrapped it in the moral urgency of salvation. The early church needed contrast. Heaven's brilliance could not shine without hell's shadow. And so Gehenna, once a poetic image of spiritual decay, was reborn as a threat of eternal suffering. Preachers discovered that fear could shape empires faster than love could transform hearts. A symbol of consciousness became an institution of control. Through centuries, art and scripture carved this new hell into the human psyche. Pain became moral currency. Guilt became obedience. The church told stories of lakes of fire not to illuminate mystery, but to enforce belief. And yet, within the same scriptures, mystics whispered another meaning. Meister Eckhart said that the fire of hell is the soul's resistance to the love of God. To the Sufis, hell was simply distance, the ache of separation from the divine. Even in Islam's Jahannam, scholars wrote of fire as purification, not vengeance. But those voices were quiet, and fear is always louder than truth. We began to live as if redemption depended on terror. People confessed out of guilt, not awakening. They prayed to escape punishment, not to discover the divine within. And slowly, the world itself began to mirror the hell we feared. Wars in the name of God, torture in the name of purity. Every ideology promising heaven, after it first destroys its enemies. The irony is cosmic. Humanity created hell on earth while dreaming of paradise beyond it. But beneath this distortion, the old truth never died. Every religion carried a hidden thread, a whisper from its mystical heart. The Buddha said that the mind creates its own hell. Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you." The Bhagavad Gita spoke of the fire of desire that consumes the soul. Different languages, one meaning, the flames are psychological, not geographical. Hell is a metaphor for the state of disconnection, when consciousness forgets its source. When you live from fear instead of awareness, the world begins to burn through you. Every grudge, every lie, every craving becomes smoke, rising from that inner fire. The punishment is not imposed from above, it grows from within. And the only escape is remembrance. Modern minds might dismiss ancient symbols as superstition, but symbols were never meant to describe the cosmos. They describe the self. Gehenna, Sheol, Naraka. They are not maps of the afterlife, but mirrors of our interior landscape. When you descend into guilt, rage, or despair, you are walking those mythic valleys. And when you emerge, more humble, more awake, you have tasted resurrection. Every descent, properly seen, is initiation. Imagine for a moment that hell was not a sentence, but a school. The most difficult one. Its lessons are suffering, humility, and surrender. The fire burns illusions, not souls. It melts the false image of self until only truth remains. In that sense, the flames are grace disguised as agony. You don't escape hell by running from it. You escape it by seeing through it, by realizing that nothing real can burn. The mystics understood this. They spoke of the dark night of the soul, not as punishment, but as purification. St. John of the Cross wrote that the soul must pass through darkness to perceive divine light clearly. The Buddha said that liberation arises only when we see suffering for what it truly is: impermanent, self-made, empty of solid form. Each path, though different in symbol, leads to the same insight. Hell is a dream woven by the sleeping mind. But humanity preferred simplicity. It was easier to fear than to understand, easier to obey than to awaken. And so, the metaphor that once pointed toward enlightenment became a threat that guarded ignorance. Whole civilizations learned to tremble before a God who never needed their fear. Hell stopped being a mirror and became a weapon. And yet beneath that distortion, something still calls to us: the memory of the original meaning. Because when you strip away the layers of dogma, you find something profoundly human. The recognition that suffering transforms, that descent precedes rebirth, that darkness, when faced, reveals light. The flames we fear are the same ones that forge gold. So maybe the question is not, will we go to hell, but how do we walk through it consciously? Because we are already in it, in fragments, in the moments when empathy collapses, when we forget the sacredness of life, when we see the world as separate from ourselves. Hell is not a punishment for being human. It's the dream of separation that makes us forget we are divine. If the myth was born from misunderstanding, the cure is understanding itself. Awareness turns fire into light. Compassion turns pain into passage. And when that shift happens, when the inner eye opens and sees the metaphor for what it is, fear loses its power completely. That is the first true liberation. To see hell not as destiny, but as doorway. If the fire of hell was never outside of us, then the only true descent happens within. Every human being carries a geography of light and shadow, a personal underworld where our forgotten selves reside. It's not a punishment, it's the natural gravity of consciousness. Everything unhealed, everything denied, eventually sinks into that inner depth, waiting to be seen again. When you suffer, when you lose something or someone, when your beliefs collapse, you fall inward. The descent begins quietly. It's not an explosion. It's a slow unraveling of certainty. You start to question what you thought was solid: your purpose, your faith, your identity. That questioning is the sound of the soul knocking on the door of its own underworld. And when you finally open it, you realize the flames are not waiting to destroy you. They are waiting to reveal you. The true fire of hell is awareness pressing against resistance. Every time truth wants to emerge and the ego says no, friction is born. That friction is suffering. It's not divine vengeance. It's divine persistence. The light insisting on entering the places you've kept dark. That's why pain feels sacred when you stop running from it. It's consciousness demanding expansion. In this sense, hell is not the absence of God. It's the denial of God within ourselves. It's the moment we refuse to forgive, the moment we choose pride over compassion, the moment we silence our own intuition because it threatens our comfort. And yet, within every act of denial, there is an invitation. The very thing we call punishment is actually the mirror showing us what we've outgrown. Think of the myths again. The Buddha did not escape hell by avoiding suffering. He awakened through it. Christ did not bypass death. He entered it and transmuted it. Every sacred story hides the same structure: descent, surrender, illumination. To descend is not to fail. It's to return to the depths of the human experience where all illusions dissolve. Only what is real survives that heat. So when you are burned by heartbreak, betrayal, loss, you are standing in your own Gehenna. You can let the flames consume you, or you can let them transform you. Pain, when resisted, becomes torment. When embraced, it becomes initiation. That's the secret the mystics kept hidden beneath the threat of eternal fire. They knew that hell is not eternal, because ignorance is not eternal. Awareness inevitably rises, just as dawn follows the longest night. The reason hell was so effective as a symbol is because we all feel it. We feel it when we hate ourselves for not being enough. We feel it when guilt replaces gratitude, when noise replaces silence, when we chase the world and lose the soul. Those moments are not moral failures. They're signals. The fire is saying, "Wake up." Every time you suffer consciously, you are burning a layer of illusion. There's a paradox here. The deeper the darkness, the closer the light. The ego fears dissolution, but the soul knows it as liberation. The mind calls it hell. The spirit calls it cleansing. That's why spiritual awakening is rarely peaceful in the beginning. You must first face everything you've hidden. Every shadow must be brought to light. It's not punishment, it's purification. Psychology now describes what mystics once intuited. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the repressed side of the psyche that holds all we deny. When unacknowledged, it controls us from below. When faced, it becomes our greatest teacher. In that language, hell is simply the shadow in its purest form, the part of ourselves that burns until it's seen. To integrate the shadow is to walk through the flames with open eyes. And once you see through the metaphor, everything changes. You begin to understand that the world's outer chaos is a mirror of the collective inner hell. Every war, every cruelty, every act of greed is humanity externalizing its unconscious fire. The task, then, is not to escape hell, but to end its illusion by healing from within. The only real exorcism is self-knowledge. Imagine for a moment that the fire you fear most is not punishment, but passion misdirected. What if every destructive urge is simply creation turned inward? Light trapped in distortion? The mystics would tell you that the same force that burns also illuminates. Anger, once purified, becomes clarity. Desire, once understood, becomes devotion. Suffering, once accepted, becomes compassion. The fire never disappears. It changes its nature. That's why even in the darkest texts, hell is described with paradoxical beauty. Flames that both destroy and refine, pain that both curses and heals. It's as if the soul itself is the alchemist, transforming anguish into awareness. To the awakened eye, fire is not the enemy. It is the forge, and you, walking through it consciously, are the gold being formed. Look at your own life. How many times have you descended, believing it was the end, only to find that the fall revealed something indestructible within you? That's the hidden truth of the myth. Hell was never about eternal damnation, but eternal return. You go down, you burn, you rise again, wiser, softer, more awake. Even modern science mirrors this pattern. Stars are born from collapse. Forests renew through fire. The universe itself expands from explosions. Destruction and creation are one rhythm, not two. Why would consciousness be any different? Perhaps the divine allows the experience of hell not to punish, but to remind creation of its own resilience, to teach the soul that light is not fragile, even when surrounded by flame. To understand hell, then, is to understand the necessity of descent. Every awakening is preceded by unlearning. Every resurrection requires a crucifixion of illusions. That's why spiritual paths, when lived honestly, feel like burning. You lose the false before you find the true. You die before you live fully. The fire strips away everything you are not. And what remains, silent, luminous, unafraid, is what religions once called the soul redeemed. So when you hear of hell, don't imagine a place beneath your feet. Imagine a moment within your life, the one that breaks you open, the one that ends your control, the one that forces you to see with new eyes. That is hell, but it is also the birthplace of wisdom. The gate to heaven is hidden inside the heart of hell. The greatest lie ever told was that hell is somewhere else, belonging to someone else. Because if we believe that, we never turn inward. We keep projecting our shadows onto others, calling them sinners, enemies, devils, anything but mirrors. But the moment you recognize that the devil you fear is the ignorance you carry, something shifts. The fire cools, compassion returns. The flames lose their power because they have fulfilled their purpose, to awaken you. So perhaps the true redemption is not to be saved from hell, but to wake up within it, to realize that the only thing ever burning was illusion itself. When the false self dissolves, what's left is pure presence, untouched by smoke or flame. That's the soul's quiet revelation. Hell is not the end of the story. It's the middle, the turning point where fear becomes understanding. And maybe, in that moment of understanding, the ancient metaphor finally does what it was meant to do. It opens the heart, not closes it. It reveals that the fire we feared for centuries was never against us. It was for us, guiding us back toward the light we had forgotten to see. We began with fear, with the image of a world burning, with the thought that hell was somewhere beneath us. But now, as the smoke clears, something quieter appears. Not destruction, but recognition. What we called hell was simply the moment the soul forgot its own light. And what we call awakening is the remembrance of that light again. When you look closely, every flame that ever frightened humanity carries the same secret geometry. Fire consumes, but it also illuminates. It erases form to reveal essence. It's not the end of creation, but its purification. The fire does not hate what it burns, it transforms it. Hell, then, is not the wrath of God. It is the friction between truth and illusion. It is the moment consciousness meets its own denial. When the false begins to collapse, the experience feels like torment. When the collapse completes, the experience becomes liberation. That's why every spiritual awakening begins as suffering and ends as serenity. We're already in hell, not as prisoners, but as students. We came here to learn how to see through the fire, how to remember ourselves through the forgetting. The soul chooses this descent the way the seed chooses darkness before the sprout. It's not punishment, it's preparation. Imagine that. The idea that even your pain is sacred. That everything you've endured was part of a language your soul speaks fluently, though your mind does not. Every heartbreak was an initiation. Every failure was a shedding. Every despair was an emptying of what could no longer stay. When you understand this, you no longer fear the flames. You begin to bless them. Because the truth is simple, almost unbearably so. Hell was never against you. It was for you. It was the sacred pressure that shaped your empathy, your depth, your compassion. Without darkness, you would never have learned tenderness. Without fire, you would never have discovered gold. The soul needs contrast to know itself. And so the universe gave us shadow, not to punish us, but to reveal what cannot be burned. The poets understood this before the theologians did. Dante, walking through the Inferno, finds himself climbing out under the stars. Rumi writes, "The wound is where the light enters you." Even physics agrees. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The same law applies to the soul. The fire cannot annihilate what is real. It can only strip away the false. And so the ancient metaphor of hell was never about damnation. It was a mirror for awakening. Every image of punishment hides a deeper invitation. Look closer. Descend willingly. Face the self you've avoided. The moment you do, the landscape changes. The flames become illumination. The heat becomes clarity. What once looked like chaos reveals itself as choreography. This is the secret the mystics tried to whisper through centuries of fear. They spoke of divine union not as escape from suffering, but as its completion. There is no way out, they said, only through. Through the body, through the mind, through the illusions of separation. And when you go through fully, when nothing in you resists anymore, you realize that the fire and the light were never two. Heaven and hell were never places. They were frequencies of perception. When consciousness sleeps, the world burns. When it awakens, the same world becomes radiant. The terrain doesn't change. The vision does. That's why the saints could walk through prisons and plagues and still speak of bliss. They weren't escaping the world. They were seeing through it. So the question is not whether hell exists, but whether you recognize it when you're in it. Because if you can recognize it, you've already begun to wake up. The awareness that sees the suffering is not suffering. The witness of the fire is untouched by flame. That's the divine spark inside you. Silent, unburned, eternal. When you rest in that awareness, the whole myth collapses in a single breath. You realize you were never condemned. You were only dreaming. The dream of hell ends when you stop believing in separation. When you remember that everything you fear is part of the same consciousness that loves. That even pain belongs to the great unfolding of unity. This is what the mystics meant when they said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." It was never a promise for the afterlife. It was a reminder for this one. And in that realization, something soft happens. The fire cools, the air clears. The same world that once looked like punishment begins to shine like a cathedral. You start to see holiness everywhere, in every face, every wound, every silence. You understand that salvation is not escape, but perception. Hell dissolves the moment you look at it with love. So yes, we are already in hell. But only because we are already in the process of awakening. We are walking the same ancient path the soul has always walked, through darkness toward recognition. The flames will rise, the illusions will burn, the old self will crumble. And then, in the quiet after the fire, something luminous will remain. The stillness you've been seeking all along. That stillness is heaven. Not the opposite of hell, but its unveiling. The other side of the same flame. When you see this, you understand that the entire human story, from fear to faith, from ignorance to awareness, was never a battle between good and evil. It was consciousness remembering itself through experience. So the next time you feel the heat of your own pain, don't run from it. Listen. There's a language hidden in that fire, speaking softly. This, too, is sacred. If you can trust that, even for a moment, the fire becomes light again. And that light, patient, ancient, forgiving, is what every religion was always pointing toward. The lie was never that hell existed. The lie was that it was meant to destroy you. In truth, it was meant to awaken you. And maybe that's what salvation really is. Not leaving the fire behind, but walking through it so completely that it can no longer harm you. You emerge not untouched, but transformed. You return to the same world, but you see it differently. The smoke clears, and you realize you were never in a prison. You were in a classroom made of flame. So in the end, the story comes full circle. Religion taught us to fear hell, but maybe hell was never meant to be feared, only understood. And when you finally understand it, the doors of hell disappear. They were never locked. They were never even there, just a threshold, waiting for you to wake up.